There are places in this world that seem to hold on to things. Memories that refuse to fade. Voices that echo long after they should have gone silent. And sometimes, if you're unlucky enough to work the night shift at one of these places, you might hear something calling your name when no one else is around. This happened to Marcus, an electrician at the Riverside Power Facility. The kind of man who could fix anything with his hands, solve any problem with steady nerves and years of experience. But what happened to him on that October night would shake him to his core and change how he saw that place forever. The Riverside facility sprawled across hundreds of acres like a small industrial city. During the day, dozens of workers filled the space with the sounds of machinery and conversation. But when darkness fell, the place transformed into something else entirely. Something vast and empty and watching. On night shifts, only 3 people stayed awake in all that emptiness. Marcus worked as both electrician and control room assistant, paired with Dave, the veteran operator who'd been running those midnight hours for over a decade. Their supervisor occasionally made rounds, but most nights he slept soundly in his office, leaving the 2 men alone with the humming generators and endless corridors. The control building sat isolated from everything else, connected to the rest of the facility by a network of paths and open spaces. To reach the kitchen where workers could heat their meals, you had to cross the old soccer field. 7 aside. Nothing but empty grass stretching into shadows, with floodlights that created more dark spaces than they illuminated. It was 2:47 a.m. when Marcus felt his stomach growl. He'd been putting off dinner, caught up in maintenance reports and system checks. His wife had packed leftover pasta, and the smell from his lunch container had been taunting him for hours. The microwave in the control room had been broken for weeks, so he grabbed his meal and headed for the door. The moment he stepped outside, something felt wrong. Not obviously wrong, not dramatically wrong, just off. Like walking into a room where someone had been arguing just before you arrived. The air carried a weight it shouldn't have had, thick and expectant, as if the darkness itself was holding its breath. Marcus had made this walk hundreds of times. 20 yards to the edge of the field, then 50 yards of open grass, then another 20 to the kitchen building. Simple, routine. But tonight, each step felt like walking deeper into something that didn't want him there. The frost-covered grass crunched under his work boots with sounds that seemed to echo longer than they should. The floodlights cast twisted shadows that shifted when he wasn't looking directly at them. His breath formed clouds in the cold air, but somehow the mist seemed to hang too long, drifting in directions the wind wasn't blowing. 30 yards across the field. 40. The kitchen building loomed ahead like a mouth waiting to swallow him. The windows glowed with fluorescent light, but instead of looking welcoming, they seemed harsh and artificial against the surrounding darkness. Inside, the familiar sounds of the facility wrapped around him. Fluorescent bulbs buzzed and flickered overhead. The heating system cycled on and off with mechanical precision. The lingering smell of the day shift's coffee, mixed with industrial cleaning solution, created an atmosphere that was both familiar and somehow alien in the dead of night. Marcus moved to the microwave, hands steady as he set the timer. 2 minutes. Just 2 minutes to heat his food and get back to the safety of the control room. The machine hummed to life, its orange light casting weird shadows across the empty cafeteria tables. That's when he felt it. A breath of Arctic air against the back of his neck. Impossible cold that had nothing to do with the building's temperature. The heating system ran constantly, keeping the interior warm enough for workers to eat comfortably. But this cold was different. It carried presence with it, the unmistakable feeling that something was standing directly behind him. Marcus turned around slowly. The kitchen was empty. Just him and the fluorescent lights and the shadows dancing in corners where the artificial brightness couldn't quite reach. But the cold remained, settling around his shoulders like invisible hands. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. Every instinct screamed that he wasn't alone, but his eyes told him otherwise. The empty chairs, the clean tables, the locked vending machines, everything exactly as it should be. Everything except for that presence pressing against him from somewhere he couldn't see. The microwave continued its steady hum. 40 seconds left on the timer. Marcus tried to convince himself it was just nerves, just the isolation of the night shift playing tricks on his mind. He'd heard stories from other workers about feeling watched, about hearing things that weren't there. Night shift folklore. Nothing more. Then he heard his name, not shouted from outside. not called from across the field. Spoken quietly, intimately, as if someone was standing right beside him in that empty room. The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It simply was, emerging from the silence like it had always been there, waiting for him to notice. Marcus, soft and patient and wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. Every hair on his body stood on end. His skin crawled with sensations like invisible insects walking across his flesh. Goosebumps erupted along his arms in waves of pure, primal terror. His mouth went dry, and his hands began to shake as adrenaline flooded his system. He whispered to himself that it must be the wind, must be the building settling, must be anything other than what it had sounded like. But his voice cracked when he spoke, betraying the fear that was rapidly consuming his rational mind. The microwave beeped. 10 seconds left. But Marcus couldn't move toward it. Couldn't turn his back on that empty room where something had just spoken his name. Then he heard it again. Marcus. Closer this time. More distinct. As if whatever was speaking had moved nearer while he stood frozen with terror. The voice carried an intimacy that made his skin crawl, like hearing someone whisper secrets meant only for him. But there was nobody there. Nobody visible, anyway. Marcus didn't think. Didn't plan. Didn't consider the consequences or the embarrassment or what Dave would say when he burst through the control room door with a story about voices in an empty building. He simply dropped his dinner container and ran. Pasta sauce splattered across the linoleum like blood as he bolted for the exit. Behind him, the microwave continued beeping, but he didn't care about the food or the mess or anything except getting away from whatever had been calling his name. The field stretched before him like an ocean of darkness. Every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes. Every patch of deeper black might conceal something waiting to reach out and stop him. But Marcus ran anyway, lungs burning, legs pumping, sweat pouring down his face despite the cold. He could feel something following him. Not footsteps, not sounds, just presence keeping pace as he sprinted across the open ground. The sensation of being hunted by something that shouldn't exist. The control room door had never looked so welcoming. Marcus burst through it gasping and shaking, his face pale and covered with perspiration. Dave looked up from his monitors with the kind of concern that comes from seeing a grown man reduced to genuine terror. Marcus tried to explain what had happened. The voice calling his name, the presence in the empty kitchen, the absolute certainty that something had been there with him. But even as he spoke, the words sounded impossible, ridiculous, like the ramblings of someone who'd let the isolation of the night shift get the better of him. Dave listened patiently, then offered the rational explanation. Nobody else was supposed to be awake. The supervisor was sleeping in his office. The facility was locked down for the night. Whatever Marcus thought he'd heard, it couldn't have been real. But Marcus knew what he'd experienced. The memory remained crystal clear, unshaken by doubt or rational explanation. For the rest of that shift, he ate cold food from the vending machines rather than return to the kitchen. He wouldn't cross that field alone again. Not in the darkness. Not with something out there that knew his name. This happened years before I started working at Riverside. But Marcus never changed his story. Not once. Every detail remained exactly the same no matter who asked or when they asked it. The timing, the sensations, the voice calling his name. Other workers might have embellished or altered their tales over time, but Marcus stuck to his account with the consistency of absolute truth. And Dave eventually admitted something else. Something he'd kept to himself that night when Marcus came running back with his impossible story. During those long midnight hours in the control room, Dave often felt like he was being watched. Through the windows that looked out over the field. From the shadows between the floodlights. By something that had no business being there but refused to stay away. Marcus never went to that kitchen alone during night shifts again. Not for the weeks that followed. Not ever. He'd wait for Dave to take his breaks, or he'd go hungry, or he'd make do with cold sandwiches and warm soda from the machines. Because some experiences leave marks that never fade, and some voices continue echoing long after they should have gone silent. The Riverside Power Facility still operates today. Night shifts still cross that field when they need to reach the kitchen. But if you talk to the workers there, really talk to them when they think nobody else is listening, they'll tell you things. About traveling in pairs after dark. About never going anywhere alone. About voices that call your name when nobody should know you're there. Because something is still waiting in that place. Still calling. still hungry for connection with the living world. And if you're unlucky enough to hear your name whispered in the darkness of an empty building, you'll understand why Marcus never went back alone. Some places hold on to things that should have been forgotten long ago. And sometimes, those things are still looking for someone to answer when they call.